Black Myth: Wukong has quickly become one of my favorite games of 2024, but at this time, there's still some optimization to be done for the team at Game Science. Thankfully, there are some simple tweaks you can make to get the most out of the performance of this game on PC and PS5, and I've gone over each setting to see how you can get the most out of this title everyone is talking about. We're talking about a massive percentage boost in performance on PC and a much smoother experience on PlayStation 5, so you'll want to give these settings a shot. Starting on PC, there are a ton of options you can dive into to get the most out of the visuals and frames in Black Myth: Wukong. If you don't know the ins and outs of why each are suggested, here's a fast breakdown of the recommended specs for a higher end GPU. If you have a mid-tier or lower GPU, you can get the easiest performance boost by simply turning ray tracing off. You will need to restart the game completely when turning ray tracing on or off for it to take effect. If you're still having issues, look into turning down shadow quality, visual effects, and hair as your first step, as these will net you the highest performance boost when turning them down. If you mess with any of those, just be sure to give the game a restart before you get going. More on all that in just a moment. For now, let's go through each setting and talk about the impact each will have. And before we go into settings, if you'd like to turn off motion blur, like I do for almost all games, it's under display settings. You'll also find camera shake here if you'd like that turned down a bit also. So full ray tracing on very high is our recommendation. With full ray tracing turned on, your only real option right now is very high because low and high, the other two options, are currently kind of broken. So if you're going to use ray tracing, this is the way to go. However, with all that said, simply turning ray tracing off will give you a more stable performance. The game still looks quite good, as you'll still have a fantastic looking game while maintaining your desired performance. Graphic preset will be custom, but for fun, here is the low setting, R settings, and cinematic. While you'll get a noticeable performance boost from setting it to low versus cinematic, you can still do better by going in and setting things individually. View distance high, not really a setting that makes a huge impact, but it will affect how vegetation looks in the distance. Going from high to cinematic didn't cause a loss of visuals, and your slight gain in frame rate will result in your best possible outcome for this one. Anti-aliasing, high is going to do just fine here. Not really something we need to dive into, but your AA setting should be about high. Post effects high. Bloom and lens flares are reduced below high, but the bigger problem I discovered was with smoke. For some reason, any setting lower than high will have a flicker to it in how it's displayed, so avoid going lower than high for the best looking post effects. Shadow quality high. Now, just a note here, this is one of your key metrics for performance. Depending on your graphics card, this will be the one setting you should consider turning down, but high is the sweet spot for it in terms of what you gain versus what you lose. At high, you get a significant boost to overall performance. Below high, you will continue to see performance gains, but you'll begin sacrificing quality at this point, which is why high is the sweet spot for most machines. And according to Digital Foundry's findings, you'll see an 18% increase in performance versus the cinematic setting for this option. That's a massive improvement you should not ignore. Texture quality very high. Texture quality not only has very little impact on performance, but also doesn't seem to degrade as you go into the lower settings. For that reason, we recommend putting it on very high, as there seems to be almost no negative effects to doing so. Visual effects quality high. Medium has an odd issue with fog. This is one issue that we will recommend high for, while Digital Foundry recommends medium. The reason for our recommendation of high is simply because there's an odd flicker issue with the fog that were present below the high setting, and bumping visual effects to high has a slight impact to your frame rate, but not having the flicker makes it worth it in my opinion. And you're still seeing a 20% boost at high. If a flicker doesn't bother you, medium will net you a 27% boost on performance, so this is one of the settings that you'll want to push and pull the levers with a bit. Hair quality high. While hair generally can look a little off in this game, at the high setting you'll see the most from the visuals without impacting FPS, as jumping just one level to very high will see you drop 3 FPS with almost no discernible gains. Inversely, going lower seems to net you almost no benefit in terms of FPS, and the hair will look much worse, especially at the low setting. You do need a restart to see the effects of this setting. Vegetation quality high. Vegetation doesn't seem to have much impact at all to performance, but the high setting has the foliage looking the best with the least negative impact. Global illumination, very high or high here. You should also consider high settings, but we're recommending very high in this category. If you have some overhead, as visually, it's almost the exact same as the cinematic option. High, medium, or low will introduce some issues, but continue giving noticeable bumps in performance. Reflection, very high. Reflection should be set to very high, period, mainly because all the other levels, you'll see the introduction of an odd flicker in objects that are being reflected. Going lower than very high also nets very little gain in performance, so go for the visual upgrade if you're able. All of our tests were done with frame generation turned off because it can introduce frame stutters at a significant rate, therefore negatively impacting game performance. So we would recommend that you do not turn it on at this time. Overall, our settings are just slightly different from those our friends at Digital Foundry recommended, but feel free to tinker and lock in what works best for you while we wait for patches from Game Science to get it locked in. And that just leaves the PlayStation 5. On the one hand, balance mode has the best input latency, but because the game uses frame generation, performance mode may seem smoother in the testing, but it has more jarring frame time spikes. There's not a great option on PlayStation 5, but we're going to recommend balanced mode in this instance. There's also quality mode, which gives you stronger visuals with a 30 FPS target, and balanced, which targets 45 FPS. No matter what you choose, be sure your television is set to game mode and to turn on 120Hz, VRR, and ALLM in the settings menu. Now, this isn't currently supported, but I am imagining that they will eventually add support for all of these features. And just as a general note, it's good to have them turned on your PlayStation 5 for when games do implement this feature. Here's how you do it. On console, your best settings will always start with your television. We'll be using a Samsung model as an example, but refer to your manual for more specific instructions should you have a different model. On our Samsung TV, the first thing we'll want to do is turn on game mode. This will allow us to use a higher frame rate and variable refresh rate on both consoles. Now, on our console, we'll want to set it to output at the highest resolution and frame rate available with variable refresh rate turned on. The TV settings will allow you to turn on these features. Having these settings set to on the console level will allow you to turn on these features in any game that supports it. Under your PlayStation 5 console settings, turn on variable refresh rate, 120Hz output, and auto low latency mode, or ALLM, if your television supports it. These settings should always be left on regardless of the game you're playing, as it'll often smooth out performance issues or unlock new options in titles like Marvel's Spider-Man 2 that you otherwise wouldn't have. In addition, be sure you select HDR should your television support it for the best looking visuals possible on all your PlayStation 5 games. And those are our best settings we recommend for Black Myth: Wukong. I completely realize that everyone will come to their own conclusions about what they prioritize with the game, but this should give you a much smoother overall feel, which is what we target with any high action title. But let us know if you found something that worked better for you. If you'd like to know how to install mods for Black Myth, we put together a quick guide on how that is done, and for more on all things gaming, keep it here at IGN.